All right, well, it looks like we're all set to go. So thanks everyone for joining us. My name's Heather Miller. I'm an adult programming librarian with the La Crosse Public Library, and I'm so glad you could join us for Finding Hygge, the making of a cozy documentary. And tonight we're joined by Rocky Walls, who is the director of the film, and he's going to be walking us through his experience. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Rocky.
Oh, thanks for having me. Are we ready to go?
Yeah, let's kick it off.
All right. All right. Well, I'm sure that many of you will have like questions or comments and thoughts. I am not a like real uptight speaker. So if there's something that you are just dying to know, I imagine you could throw it in the chat and Heather can interrupt me. We can stop. But we're definitely going to leave some time for Q&A at the end too. So also, if you just want to hold those thoughts, you're more than welcome to. I'm here for you. I'm not here to hear my own voice talk about this topic. I've presented about it a lot, and I have a lot of things to say about it. But I've learned over the past few years now that the best thing that I can do is sort of read the room, which is hard to do on Zoom, but I'm going to try and read the room and make sure that I'm here for you. I answer questions that you have. So usually, though, the topics and the questions that I touch on most or that get asked about the most are really in like two camps. Like 50% of folks are really interested in the topic of Hygge in general and what kinds of things we learned and how different people applied Hygge. And that we get those questions whether people haven't seen the film yet or even at a Q&A right after a screening. People still want to learn more about that. And then the other half, or the other 50%, is around the making of the film, sort of behind the scenes questions that you really can't get answered just by watching the film. Things like, where'd you track down all these people? Why did you decide to make the film to begin with? What was the process like in creating it? And so this presentation that I've put together over the last 4 years now at this point, and just keep continuing to modify is just kind of a combination of both. So I'm going to dive in just quickly by way of introduction. I'm Rocky. Again, Heather mentioned I am on Instagram and other social media channels. So you're welcome to follow me, send me a message if you have a Hygge related question or a filmmaking related question after tonight's presentation. I'm very responsive on those places. I put my Instagram down because that's probably the one I spend the most time on, but I'm on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all that good stuff too. And then just a couple of other websites there if you want to follow up for any reason after tonight's presentation. Cool. So diving right in, and these are numbered because at some point I gave a presentation where I specifically called out 7 things we learned or 6 things we learned or something like that. But there's not going to be a quiz later, so you don't need to worry too much about that. This first one, though, is sort of a good way to introduce the topic of Hygge and the topic of this, how we made this film. And this idea of keeping up with trends was really, really important. Hygge is definitely has been, and I've been monitoring it, will continue to be a bit of a trend, although it's not nearly been as fading or passing of a trend as a lot of people thought that it might be. But I want to share something with you that was kind of funny. First, I want to tell you about how we found out about Hygge, and then sort of what happened around the first big explosion of interest with Hygge in 2016. So, my business partner and I, that's Zach, my business partner on the right, and then I'm on the left there, went to Denmark in 2016. And I'm actually wearing a shirt for a company called Podio. It's a software company that we actually did some work for. And that's why we were there. We were there for a work trip. We were producing short films for this company. And while we were there for about 3 days, weren't there very long, but for about 3 days, we just took note of some really marked differences in culture and society. Nothing like huge, nothing major, but noticeable enough, like the way that people who are working together in businesses like Podio, where we visited and did some work, but many others as well. People would get together for lunch every day. All the coworkers there, like the lunches would be catered, and everybody would get together and everybody would sit together. You would see the CEO of a company sitting right with all the other workers at the company. And we thought that was kind of different and interesting. We also noticed that people were in the park during, this was like May, so it was right around the time that it was starting to get warm again. People were in the park during the workday, during their break, like during their lunch break or during another break, just kind of laying in the grass, like just enjoying the sun and hanging out and talking. Nobody was, on their phones, and it was just different. It was really interesting in a lot of ways. And this isn't going to be a whole lesson or cultural exploration of Denmark, but all that to say, we noticed some things that we thought were different, and we asked our friend who we worked with and lived there, what was up, what we might be missing. And he said, well, I think some of what you're seeing is this concept of hygge, which is this idea of like being comfortable and cozy and being surrounded by people that you trust and friends, and sort of letting the cares of the world kind of fade away for a little bit. And we're like, oh yeah, okay, interesting. That's, boy, you could really explore that in a lot of different ways. And we kind of took this note that maybe we would come back one day and make a short video about it or something. But interestingly enough, the topic that year, just a few months after we got back from Denmark, just exploded out of like basically nowhere. There were all these articles being written about it. There were books being written about it. And this topic of hygge just blew up. This is a Google Trends report. So Google actually allows you to basically track or search the frequency of search terms using the Google search engine. And around the end of 2016 is where you see that first peak, and then it dips just a little bit, but never actually goes back down to what it was prior to 2016. Then it peaks again around winter time 2017, and this is a common thing now, a trend that we see every year with hygge. It just continues to be more and more searched, and it peaks around the winter time every year because that idea of being warm and cozy is so popular in the winter. But here's what's funny, and here's what's interesting. All the time that hygge was kind of growing and becoming really sort of like a hot topic all around the world, and books were being written, and a documentary film was being created, these other folks were kind of trying to jump on the bandwagon. And so you'd see articles like this: move over, hygge, Swedish lagom is here. And people would try and capitalize on these other sort of Scandinavian or European concepts that were similar by definition, but when you actually dug into it and looked, nobody was actually that interested in lagom. So that red line is the frequency of search queries for lagom versus hygge. And then Scotland jumps on board and says, move over, hygge, meet Kosagak, the latest cozy wellness trend. Take note, Denmark, this country is putting hygge on notice. This is a real article. And look, and you go, okay, so how interested were people in that? Almost nobody. Like maybe 11 people in 2017 were interested. And here's the really funny thing. An actual Gaelic professional linguist came out and said, actually, Kosagak doesn't really mean cozy. It's more about like a damp hole that like a lizard or like a rodent would hide in. And so this guy says, if squidgy, damp, and lousy are really the vibe Visit Scotland are going for with their version of hygge, then their opinion of the Scottish tourism sector is even lower than mine. And so this whole idea of you just being able to take any old word and throw it out there to the American or the British population and expect it to stick didn't prove to be the case. And in fact, hygge over the last 5 years has continued to just increase in interest and popularity. And part of that is because it's actually just completely ingrained in the Danish culture. It's one of the reasons why Denmark constantly appears on one of the happiest country in the world lists, and why Denmark sort of has a history and a reputation for being a country that it cares very much for each other and its people. Which brings me to this next point, something that we learned very early on, is that Hygge, along with a lot of other aspects of Denmark, has a lot to do with trust. And we've all heard probably that trust is something that you have to earn, or that maybe trust is granted and then you lose it. But what we learned more than anything else as we explored this concept, and as we learned more about the Danish culture and Danish people, is that trust is actually like a feeling. It's an emotional response to your environment and to the people around you. It's something that you truly can know and feel if it's there or not. And one of probably the most obvious symbols or signs of that is this picture, which can be taken just about anywhere in Copenhagen or any of the cities in Denmark, just about any time. I took this picture during one of my visits, and I'm interested to know if you can point out or recognize what is maybe unique, what makes this a very, very Danish picture versus somewhere in New York or LA or anywhere in America. Just think about it for a second. I won't ask you to actually show your hands or speak up, but if you identified that, yes, in fact, there is a stroller here, and yes, in fact, there is a baby in it, just chilling outside the door because mom and or dad is inside having a cup of coffee. This is extremely common in Denmark. In fact, there have been stories of Danish parents who, after immigrating or moving to the US, have gotten into trouble, even arrested, for leaving their children out in the cold, or out in the public, just where somebody could walk by and push this baby away. But what's really interesting is when you ask, because I did when I was there, when you ask somebody who is watching your child, the really interesting response from virtually anyone in Denmark is, well, everyone, which is, I think, a very marked difference from a lot of other modern societies, especially in the US and in the UK, where our mentality would be, who is watching your baby? Because in our mind, it's a rhetorical question, and the answer is well, nobody. You're inside. You're not watching your child. When in fact, in Denmark, the mentality of trust is that everyone is watching my baby, just like how very few people lock their doors in a lot of homes in Denmark, because the idea is that I have no reason to really lock up and expect my neighbors or the people around me to come in and steal, because we don't do that here. Not that they don't have crime in Denmark, but the idea of trust is really ingrained in their society. So this is something that we explored more and more as we looked into who to film, who to interview, how to portray the people who were going to talk about Hygge in the film. Which brings us to another point, which is that people ultimately connect with other people. And we know this as documentary filmmakers, when we do our work for the company, and the work that I do for where I work at 12 Stars Media. We know that people connect with other people. We're always telling the stories of interesting characters, people who can inspire communities or audiences to look at things differently, or maybe change the way they think. And so this idea of people connecting with other people is how we began to consider who we were going to feature in the film. And so these are this is kind of fun. This is a neat look into the past. These slides, and I'm going to show you these next 4 or 5 slides, are the actual documents that we created in 2016 before we had even turned a camera on. These are developmental documents in film production, whether it's documentary or narrative work. You have multiple phases, and the initial part of a film is the development phase, which is where you sort of outline what you're trying to accomplish, what the story is, some of the details around your goals, or for a documentary, who you might be interviewing or featuring. Those kinds of things are things that you figure out ahead of time. And these are the actual documents that we created really early on. And so we have this purpose statement. People who watch the film will understand Hygge better, but ultimately come to their own conclusions. We had an audience in mind, people who are interested in how the concept of Hygge might improve their lives. We had a distribution plan. We talked about background and challenges, sort of defined Hygge for ourselves in the very beginning with just a little bit of research, and talking about why we were making the video, because at the time in 2016, we had a lot of division beginning. We've had a lot of division developed since then, of course, but 2016 was a year where a lot of that division really came to the forefront of our minds. Trust was at an all-time low. There are surveys and research done to measure trust in countries and in corporations and across the world, and trust has been dipping and declining over the last several years. And so these were things that we were looking at. We mapped out, in your traditional high school literature class, we all learn about story arcs, and story arcs apply to films as well, narrative films especially, but documentaries have story arcs often as well. And so we talked about the exposition, or the beginning, where we would introduce the concept of Hygge and then build some tension and complication, exploring Hygge as it relates to cultural issues, and ultimately peaking around this concept of the dark side of Hygge, which I'll talk about later, and then resolving some of that conflict by really challenging the viewer to see Hygge in their own way, and understanding that Hygge might not be as simple of a concept as we all think, that, oh, we can just quickly read a blog article or even watch a documentary and know exactly what it means. And so for each of those sections, we started to explore who are we going to talk to, and what kinds of questions are we going to ask them. And so down at the bottom, we have a list of folks. Dana, who is a Canadian, actually lives, I think, closer to you all than she does to me. She's in Winnipeg in Manitoba. She's actually an immigrant, or a third generation removed from Denmark. Her grandparents immigrated to Canada from Denmark. And Mike Viking, who's the author of the Little Book of Hygge. There was a professor in the UK we were looking into. There was this Airbnb family that was really fun. This is a sort of a fun story. People often ask how we found all these folks. Dana, I had worked with previously and just knew that she had Danish roots. Her name, actually, Dana, means from Denmark. So I had just taken note of that, and it just sort of worked out that she was available and was open to being in a documentary. Mike, the author of the book, I actually reached out directly to him through Twitter, which just goes to show that social media then, and even still now, can open doors for all kinds of really cool stuff. Gary was a chef and a restaurateur that we featured out on the West Coast in Denmark. And then when we started booking our travel, this was really interesting. When we started booking our travel, there was an Airbnb that we decided to stay at in Copenhagen. And the family who ran the Airbnb asked us why 17 Americans were coming to Denmark and staying a week, and we said, well, we're making a documentary film, and it's about the Danish concept of Hygge. And just instantly, the mother in this family, the matriarch of this family, just sent us this huge long response on Airbnb about Hygge and about all these challenges that the world is facing, and about how Hygge is something that people really should be looking into. And it was just instantaneously, everybody on our team sort of looked at each other after we read that message and thought, yeah, we should definitely ask these folks if they want to be in the film. And so some of it is like that too. When you're making a film, you just kind of roll with it, and opportunities present themselves, and you take them on. So we just went through that process with every part. As we talked through the tension and the complication, we considered things like how materialism and social media and mental health. We also talked about immigration and the refugee challenges that Denmark, like many other countries, has had in the past, and that's where we found this concept of the dark side of Hygge. And so we just kind of dug into all of that and lined up people to interview, and spent the next 3 months, I think, after we put together that list, hopping on planes and flying all over the world to interview these folks, and ended up with, as I'll talk about in a little bit, about 30 hours of footage. So people connect with other people, and we corralled a really great group together. I've touched on this, and there's a video clip that normally I play, but because video clips tend to not do real well over Zoom, I'll just tell you a little bit about it. But this concept of the dark side of Hygge, in this clip, one of our interviewees, Franz, explains the dark side of Hygge. And quite simply, he just describes it as this idea that if Hygge is a feeling and an environment, an ambiance that you create when you're around people that you're comfortable with, people that you feel close to, people that you feel safe with, and you're able to kind of let your guard down, that's great. That's all fine and dandy, except that if you're a person on the outside of that circle, if you're a person that doesn't fit into the comfort circle, the people that you feel most safe and trusting around, then Hygge becomes a little bit exclusive. And all of a sudden, you amplify that and multiply it across the culture, and across the country, a fairly homogenous country at that. It can and does sort of play into a feeling of being closed off, being closed-minded, being unwelcoming. And in fact, we were able to talk to some folks who, Franz being one of them, and a few others, who felt that the concept of Hygge overall, although it has nice aspects to it, actually contributed to the country's sort of unwillingness to welcome refugees, unwillingness to welcome people who might view things differently than they do. And so we explored that head on in the film. And I think what it did was, as I mentioned, made everything a lot more real. Because if you explore anything long enough, you'll find out that there are multiple perspectives and multiple sides. And I think that one of the things that happened with Hygge is that a lot of the blog posts and articles and even books that were written about the concept sort of made it feel like it was all just about fluffy socks and pouring yourself a cup of hot chocolate and sitting by the fire, or with a nice book, or with 2 or 3 people that you can have some cozy conversation with. And while that's perfectly fine, if that's a feeling that you want to embrace, and a feeling that provides some benefit and positivity to your life, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's also the challenge of, but you understand that's not a magic bullet. Hygge isn't going to save the world by allowing us to feel cozy in front of the fire. There are times where we have to step outside of our comfort. There are times where we have to set Hygge aside and invite somebody in and welcome them who maybe makes it feel a little less comfy, but it's the right thing to do. And I think that exploration of the flip side, or maybe another perspective on the topic of Hygge, really helped to make it well-rounded, and helped, I think, viewers ultimately realize, well, actually, maybe this is a concept that's even more interesting and challenging and complex than I thought, which is cool. Another sort of darker side to things, or challenging side to things, is a quote that has been attributed to a couple of different authors over time and throughout history. But this idea of killing your darlings, which means taking things that you really love, and going ahead and cutting them or removing them from your book or from your film in this case. And so, as I mentioned, we ended up with over 30 hours of content, 30 hours of footage, from I think 7 or 8 different trips to, like we talked about Denmark. We were also in the UK. We went to Manitoba, like I mentioned, out to Colorado twice. It was a lot, and so people have often said, I can't imagine what the editing looked like. And I can sort of tell you this like little ugly photo collage here that I put together can give you an idea. All of those little yellow papers on the wall are post-it notes. Every single one of those post-it notes, and that's not even all of them, had a phrase written on it that was either a quote from an interview or sort of like the gist of a section of that 30 hours that we had. And so we had our post-production team writing down every single one of those and then arranging them across 9 or 10 different what we call beats or parts of the film so that we could analyze like how much like is there an area of this film that we have so much content that we have to question, maybe there are 1 or 2 people that shouldn't even speak to this topic in the film, or is there an area of the film where we know that there's something really important that needs to be talked about but nobody really talked about it. And so these post-it notes became like the obsession for about 6 months in our office, and we just sort of moved them around. Gradually, we took them down, deleted them, killed our darlings, so to speak. And a fun story with that. This is our friend who actually was the gentleman that worked at Podio at the time that we went to go visit. And he was the first person that we talked to about Hygge. He was the one who explained to us, when we were there. I mentioned to you that we asked a friend, what is the vibe that we're getting here? And so we interviewed him when we were in Denmark, and this terrible thing happened. We got all those post-its up on the wall. We started editing the film, and we realized that Michael, our friend who sort of kicked this whole thing off, didn't fit into the narrative anymore. And so I had to send him I had the displeasure, the unfortunate job of sending him a message on Facebook and saying, Michael, how would you feel about not being in the documentary? And fortunately, he said, listen, I understand. I totally get, what you guys have to do and the challenge of what you're doing. And he said, if I'm not in the film, I will still respect you and be your friend. And so we cut his entire part of the film, which was kind of disappointing because he's quite funny. But it's what you have to do in order to get down to a 90-minute documentary. I had a great clip that I normally play, but like I said, we'll skip those for tonight. But so I had to do that. I had to kill one of my darlings. And then finally, another thing that we sort of learned and that I like to share with everyone, this was our first feature documentary film project. We've had a few since then. But this whole idea of when the film is done, the work has just begun, is a concept or an idea that, wow, we really had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, because things like, oh gosh, I guess we have to kind of build a website so that people who search for this, even years later, as Heather and I talked about, will be able to find it and figure out how to watch it, and develop social media profiles for people to interact with and engage with. And oh gosh, I guess we're going to need a poster, and we're going to have to promote events and film festivals. And oh, by the way, Visit Denmark, the country's tourism agency, contacted us and they want to partner together to do a big advertising campaign. And wow, we had no idea that would ever happen. So we have to figure out how to answer them and how to work and coordinate with them on what ended up becoming $1 million ad campaign, where they gave away 24 trips to Denmark to people all over the world in the month of December in 2017. And so we just had all this stuff going on, and realized what a lot of filmmakers find out the hard way, which is that most filmmakers or studios spend as much time and money marketing and distributing their film as they do making the film. In fact, often the budget for marketing and distributing a film is even higher than making the film. And so it's just an interesting sort of idea, because you think you make a film and then you kind of put it out there in the world. And you just think that everything is just going to work out from there. I would assume the film is done. Like Netflix is probably going to be calling any minute and offering us some great deal and put it on their streaming platform, right? And no, that's not the way it works at all. There's a lot of work that goes into it after the film is done, and we love that work now. But it's something that we had no idea about in the beginning. So it was a kind of a fun lesson. Wow, I went through that, I think, in just about the right amount of time, or the amount of time that I wanted to. That leaves me with lots of great questions, hopefully that you have. Heather, if you have any that you want to tee up. Like I said, talked a little fast because I wanted to get to this point where we could ask questions. Didn't want to kind of drive down too deep into any individual topics because I didn't want to bore you if it was something you didn't want to hear about. So at this point, anything goes. Happy to answer any questions that y'all have.
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or use the chat feature. And if you haven't had an opportunity to watch this fabulous documentary, I did put in the chat feature the link where you can get a free code to stream it, or the link to our catalog where you can request a hold to borrow the DVD. So there's that as well. But yes, please do feel free to share any questions you might have for Rocky on his insights throughout the project.
And I can just make stuff up too and talk. I mean, I want you all to get your money's worth here, but that's a great question. I can. By the way, Heather, I pulled up the chat, so I'll read these questions out loud too, because I know there's also a recording. So um, Karen asks, the documentary makes me want to visit Denmark. First of all, thanks. That was something that we tried really hard to capture is a lot of the essence of Denmark. We didn't want it to feel like a tourism commercial necessarily, but Denmark is a really beautiful and wonderful place to go see. It's actually got a lot of similarities to the US and to the Midwest. You all are in Wisconsin and we're here in Indiana. So, there are definitely some similarities there geographically and weather and all that. And Denmark is sort of kind of like latitudinally similar to us. They have harsh winters as well. Although it's kind of funny because they talk about how harsh their winters are. And I feel like I don't know. I'm not convinced. I think you all have it worse than the Danes do. I really do. I don't think their winters are as bad as yours. But I will answer your question. How do their citizens feel about tourism? In the bigger cities like Copenhagen, Copenhagen is a really, really diverse city. And they are very, very tourist focused, and they have a lot of tourism in Copenhagen and around that island. Basically, Copenhagen is on Denmark is kind of it juts up off of Germany geographically, and so the big piece that juts up off Germany is actually called Jutland. That's the name of that particular part of Denmark. And then there are there's lots of islands all over Denmark. The big ones are where Copenhagen is, and then a few other sort of significant cities. And so Copenhagen is on the big island. And Copenhagen is a wonderful place to visit. They're very, very welcoming. People love to interact with tourists there. They're very patient. They speak English there in addition to Danish. As you get into the heart of like Jutland, for example, they're less inclined to like speak English with tourists in the middle of nowhere. We experienced, stopping at a grocery store, driving through the country, and the people, maybe being a little bit peeved at a bunch of young Americans coming in and not having any idea how to interact or buy food from them. Certainly weren't rude, but it was a very different experience than in Copenhagen. But overall, the country I feel like is extremely welcoming. You can drive across Denmark in about 3 hours from one side to the other for the most part. They have ferries that you can drive your car right onto and park, like a big parking garage, and then go across from like Copenhagen to Aarhus, which is another one of the big cities, and another great place to visit. They got great museums there. So they're very welcoming to tourists, and I would go to their Visit Denmark website and just explore there, because I know several people that work there or have worked there, and they're great folks. I have been there at this point now 5 times. I went the one time that my business partner and I just explored for business, and then 4 times after that, mostly to film. But then I also took my family in 2018 for like a big, like, let's go tour, and I want you all to meet all the people in the film and everything. So and I would go back in a heartbeat. Um, Someone says, thanks, Rocky. How have your experiences in making the film affected you and your approach to living? Great question. We almost always get that question. And so I cannot overstate how much studying this topic has affected me. I'll give you some examples that are going to sound a little dramatic, but I'll backpedal and explain the subtler ways that they impacted us. We were a team of 20 people. My company was 20 people when we embarked on making this documentary film, and we were in our 10th year as a company, and we had been growing since we started, and we were out of control on like growth and revenue generation, and trying to just constantly be a better and bigger company. And interestingly enough, exploring the concept of Hygge and the concept of appreciating and being content with what you have, and yes, sure, pressing on and being innovative and improving, but also not improving for improvement's sake. Mike Viking, the author of the Little Book of Hygge, introduced us to a concept of the hedonic treadmill, this idea that you just, if you're not careful, you constantly are looking for the new thing to bring satisfaction and happiness in your life. The idea that, oh, if I could just have that car, if I could just get a little bit bigger house, and that never ends. And so over the last 4 years since really embarking on this journey, we have slimmed our company down. We have 8 people on our team now. We expired our lease. We had a 4-year lease on a big fancy office, and we let that lease go, and we actually bought a building. We bought a cozy 140-year-old home in downtown Noblesville, Indiana, that we have renovated. We've refurbished and made our office. My wife and her sisters are actually taking the first floor of that office and turning it into a small batch made from scratch bakery, where we're implementing. I mean, like, and I'm like, you're gonna think that I'm like a crazy person that's just obsessed over this concept now. But really, it's not just the concept of Hygge, it's all of the things around it. But I was just posting today on the social media accounts for the bakery. We've got our fireplace room like coming together, where you can come in and get a cup of coffee and a pastry and sit and enjoy the fire. And I didn't use the word Hygge, but of course I was thinking in the back of my mind that that's what I want people to come in and feel. And so it's just this idea of not constantly chasing what's new and what's better, and sort of being happy and content in the moment. I've applied it in smaller ways with my kids too, where as often as possible, I try to come home and plug my phone in upstairs in my bedroom or in the office as if it was a landline, and then spend the evening with everybody without screens, so that I'm not constantly checking a notification or something. Interesting little tidbit, fun fact. I'm in the film. Of course, I'm the person that asks the question at the very beginning. There's this really slow, awkward start at the beginning where I ask Franz, what is Hygge, or how can people find it? You hear my voice. but I'm actually in the film. There's a scene of social, it's like a social media montage and phone notification montage. And there's somebody sitting on a couch scrolling through their phone while their kids are playing Candyland on the floor. And that's me. I wanted to be the person scrolling through his phone while his kids were enjoying Candyland on the floor, just sort of as a metaphor and a challenge to myself in my life. So that's some of the ways that it's affected me. Next question. You all are great. Why you're filling the chat with questions, and this is awesome. I love it. So I'm just going to keep plugging through them. How has Hygge evolved since the popularity of Hygge swept the world? Well, I can confidently say that the Danes were very surprised. Basically, any native Dane or anyone who had been living in Denmark for any length of time at all, they were pretty shocked that America and the UK were even interested in this concept at all, because to them it feels so natural and simple that like the idea of looking at it, the idea of exploring it seemed really strange to them. I mean, there's not really a direct sort of like apples to apples comparison in America, but I kind of feel like maybe a little bit of a hyperbolic example would be like if someone were to all of a sudden, if someone in Asia or in Europe or in Africa were all of a sudden to like grab hold of the concept of awesome, like the word awesome that we use all the time in America, and they were just so interested all of a sudden, like, how do I get more awesome in my life? And we would look at that and we would think, what? Like, that's just a word we use to describe something that's, you know, better than good. I don't know. And so this idea of like Hygge being so interesting was very surprising to them. And then therefore, I really don't think in Denmark it changed much. Like, I really don't think that people in Denmark became more aware of it or even changed their sort of perception of it, especially because of its increase in popularity. I will say that while we were there were people who acknowledged that Hygge had been evolving and changing because of social media, because of technology and screens, the portability of technology and gaming and all of those things. And so while I don't necessarily think it's evolved or changed a whole lot because of people's interest in it, I think it has sort of succumbed to some of the same challenges we experience all over the world with the, you know, the implementation of constantly being connected to our devices and things like that. So that's something to kind of think about. Do I think the pandemic has impacted people's interest and experience of Hygge? I do a little. I think that we saw another big uptick in interest in Hygge, especially last year. Well, I should say, I'm sorry, and I would have been 2 years ago, especially in 2020, when you know, the initial surges and lockdowns and shutdowns, and like people, even if you weren't exposed or didn't test positive for COVID, you were quarantining, and I think that during that time we saw a peak in interest in Hygge, especially simultaneously with the cold weather, which always sort of peaks the interest in Hygge. But interestingly enough, I still don't think it was as peaked or as high as it was in 2016. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe just the initial wave just was so heavy that we'll never see that again. I'm not sure. But I think that anytime we spend time at home more often, whether it's because of a pandemic or because it's winter and it's cold, people are interested in Hygge. Another great question. Do I know of any studies examining the mental and physical health and wellness benefits of Hygge-centric culture and society? I can tell you that there is a gentleman, oh, darn it. His name's Jesper. I might need to look it up. He is a student of um, Hygge in like the truest sense of the word. I was fortunate to sit on a board. I was like the least qualified person, but I was still had the great honor of sitting on the board to present Hygge to the uh, oh gosh, what is it called? The oh, I can't remember what it is now. And see, that's proof that I was the least qualified. I think it was like I can't remember what it is. Anyway, this other gentleman was on the board as well, and I will try and find his information and see if I can sneak it in the chat here in a minute. But yeah, there are people who have done some studies on not just Hygge centric, but also sort of the social welfare uh, system that they have in Denmark. Mike Viking, the author of the Little Book of Hygge, is also CEO of an organization that he founded called the Happiness Research Institute. And he actually consults with municipalities and even countries on how to affect happiness in your country, and he has done work beyond writing, the Little Book of Hygge, which is more of like a coffee table book. He has done work on the effects of social welfare and things like that, and of course Hygge factors into it on physical and mental health in countries. So I would look at Mike Viking and the Happiness Research Institute, as well as Nick Marks, who is also featured in the film, did a TED Talk on happiness and really interesting paradox with happiness and suicide rates, and how strangely in the countries that often are considered the happiest, often suicide rates are higher overall per capita because they think because in a place where more and more people, the majority of people tend to be happy and content with life, when you are not, it's a greater discrepancy, and it makes it harder to combat those mental health challenges. And so I would look at Nick Marks's TED Talk as well, and then potentially any additional research that would accompany that. I was going to try and look up that Jesper's name. I'll see if I can get it. But
And I'll just mention quickly, Rocky, while you're doing that, we do have several copies of the book you mentioned, The Little Book of Hygge. And I just did a quick search in our catalog. We had 44 other books and movies on the concept of Hygge. So we've got plenty of resources for you to choose from at the library.
There are so many. And it's really great. I think it's great that there's so many resources. But a lot of them are more of that kind of surfacey level, sort of how to make a cozy environment in your house, stuff like that, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a big part of it. UNESCO, that's what it was, y'all. The UNESCO, what is it called? I'm reading it now. Intangible cultural heritage of humanity is what it was. The United Nations intangible cultural heritage. That was what we were on the board to submit Hygge as for consideration of that. Okay, and then I lied. It's not Jesper, it's Jeppe. And I will put his name in here for you. I would search him. And thanks, Tom, for putting that comment in. A recent book, Brainwash by David and Austin Perler, deals with negative effects on physical and mental health, research connected with too much screen time. Yeah, those screens. I know everybody's got to get the TikTok in, but put those things down too. Jeppe has written research papers on these topics. He is an anthropologist and PhD with a focus on Hygge and consumer culture. And he published the first academic article on Hygge. So I would look him up if you want to like really dig in. Like if you want to get into the nitty gritty of like Hygge from like an academic perspective, that is like the guy. Jesper is actually a really common name in Denmark. That's why I thought it was Jesper. I know like 4 Jespers. But that is not, this guy's name is Jeppe. Or Jeppe, I think. Cool, we're like almost at time. Does anybody have any other questions? You all had great questions. Thank you so much for asking such great questions. I hope you can watch the film if you haven't yet. We're really proud of it. It was a good time.
Well, I will echo what Karen just said. The film is beautiful and she plans to watch it again, as do I. So again, if you haven't had the wonderful opportunity yet to take a look at the documentary, please feel free to grab the free streaming code, watch it online, or borrow the copy that we have at the library in our catalog. It was just such an enlightening film and made even more wonderful by the insights you shared this evening, Rocky. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your creative talents. It's just a beautiful film. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on tonight, and also thanks for having the film in your library. And if I can ever do anything else to bring more Hygge into your library or your community, just let me know.
Thank you. We very much appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Stay safe and stay warm. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.